Welcome to Ranting and Raving. It's going to be another episode where we're going to talk some more Saints football. It's been a while. Today we're going to take a look at at least the significant offseason moves that the Saints have made so far. Some new players we've signed, some players they've retained, some players and personnel that they've allowed to leave for various reasons. As we get closer to the draft, I want to take a look at how they've done so far with the offseason, and for each player, just take a look at an idea of what they did last year, and also what I expect their impact to be, either positive or negative, going into this year. So, not really, except we're extremely relevant, going to talk a ton about the coaching situation or some of the other factors that certainly have been beaten to death, not undeservedly, but beaten to death. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started with really the most notable, second most notable, and that is somehow, impossibly, but not impossibly, the Saints retained Michael Thomas. So Michael Thomas has come back on what is essentially a 1 year deal after what's jokes aside, what's got to be an incredibly disappointing and frustrating 2022 for him. That first week against the Falcons, you know, towards the end of the game, really, just straight up, I'm back, looking like a psycho on the field, dominating, gets hurt, out for the year again for the most part. Only played in 3 games. Was really only impactful in one. It's just a bummer. You have to feel bad for Mike. So, from the optimistic point of view, the thing is, even if Mike has some lingering issues with his feet, I think a 16 or 17 game season of Michael Thomas floor is either the Baltimore or the San Francisco version of Anquan Bolden. So a really good player who's incredibly reliable on third down, who can keep the chains moving, keep the offense on schedule, and provides a crap ton of passion and drive for his teammates that galvanizes the team. That's kind of your floor. Now, depending on how much he's lost, although going based on what we saw last year, not much, has been lost. Mike can be a far more impactful player than that. He's a first down machine. It doesn't mean he has to just get them on third down, but having a guy who can just reliably make contested catches, who can be a threat in the red zone, who can bully the opposition, who brings a degree of physicality to the offense. Not only is that useful no matter what situation you're in, but if you're looking at the receiving core with Olave and Shaheed, I think pretty clearly being the other two guys, you've got a ton of speed. You have guys who can win with routes, so they're not just burners. Really, Olave is the player that they hoped Brandon Cooks would be. And Cooks has had a great career. Like, jokes in New Orleans aside, Cooks has had a great NFL career, but Olave is really the type of player they were hoping would be. Not just the speed, not just the explosive downfield plays, but the ability to run the whole route tree, be a possession guy, be a 10 catch a game guy if he needs to be. Olave showed a lot of ability to do that, despite at times his quarterback not having the ability or the willingness to get him the ball. More on that later. So, optimistically, Michael Thomas returns not necessarily to offensive player of the year levels, but to a turbo Marcus Colston, even though they're completely different players, but just from a production standpoint, a first down machine and an incredibly impactful part of the offense. Pessimistically, instead of dominating on the field, once again, Mike dominates the training table. If he is hurt for a fourth year in a row, I don't care how much we love the guy, how much you love his passion, his work ethic. If he's hurt 4 years in a row, you got to let him go. I really, really hope, if for nothing else other than for his sake, that doesn't happen this year. I hope he gets most, if not a complete full season, and gets a chance to get his career back on track. This is a guy who was on a Hall of Fame, potentially a first ballot Hall of Fame track. And, these last 3 years of injuries have really, really heavily derailed that. So I would love to see that for Mike. So the next guy on the list, also a guy that we retained, is Juwan Johnson. So played 16 games, had about 500 yards, had 7 touchdowns, and that's with Andy Dalton as his quarterback for most of the year. Juwan is a guy that the Saints brought in, that they converted from wide receiver, that they've developed. They put a lot of effort into it. He's put an enormous amount of effort into it, into changing his body, really learning the tight end position, becoming a guy who he's not yet at the place where he's reliable, but he was dynamic. And there was a lot of meat left on the bone last year. I think with a different quarterback, or especially with different and better play calling, there was a lot more Juwan could have done that wasn't necessarily asked of him or given the opportunity for. So optimistically, I think he's very well could be an ascending player. He's clearly shown ability within the red zone to make contested catches, to make off-platform catches, to make really all the things you want a tight end to be able to do in the red zone, but also being able to make plays up the seam, to be able to convert third downs, to do again a lot of the stuff you want from a receiving tight end. Is he a guy who necessarily will become a star? I don't think he has. I don't think he has good enough feet to be a good enough route runner to become. And keep this in mind, tight ends typically do develop slowly. Um, I don't think he has the feet to really develop into a high end tight end. Like not necessarily talking Travis Kelsey, who's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but even the next level below that. But I do think he could be a very impactful player. Pessimistically, though, you're talking about a guy who was a converted wide receiver. Last year may be the best year of his career. I I genuinely don't think it will be, but that possibility does exist. Last year could be the best version of him that we ever see. 7 touchdowns, 500 yards, basically double Traquan Smith, but without the third round pick. Um, like that could be his peak. Um, do I think it will be? I honestly don't, but it's also possible. He's been given the contract, not a huge contract, but a good contract, an extension. Um, does he still have the same drive? Does he click with Carr, especially for tight ends? In particular, that chemistry with the quarterback, seeing the field the same way, understanding the playbook the same way is incredibly important. Carr is a tight end friendly quarterback, historically. So, um, you know, do I think I lean more towards the optimistic in this case? Yes, but it is entirely possible that for various reasons, Juwan, falls off big time, and he's another, coulda, woulda, shoulda been player for the Saints. Now, getting into guys we lost, first on the list, the Hulk Hogan of the Saints locker room, the big Canadian destroyer, Mr. Steroids himself. I half joke on that. I don't think it was actually busted for steroids, but his production did go to shit for the most part since he didn't do the steroids. Now I checked on the site. I checked said he had 5 sacks. I don't think he had 5 sacks. I think he actually had 3 sacks. But played 17 games last year. Wasn't really an impact player. Um, Obviously is a loss, so I'm looking at this as far as how it impacts the Saints, whether that's letting a guy who could be really good go away or directly playing them since he did sign within the division. Optimistically, I think he's a wildly inconsistent player. He's a guy who probably will never live up to his physical tools, just the raw power and um, you know downhill explosiveness that at times he demonstrates. And I think he's going to continue to be really, really inconsistent. Pessimistically, though, I can also say that part of why he was so inconsistent in New Orleans is because he was almost never paired next to a really high quality player that he could play off of, and that maybe he's not. Well, definitely he's not the guy at defensive tackle. But when he's not the main guy the opposition has to game plan for from a pass rush perspective, he's really able to be productive and impactful. And unfortunately, while they make a ton of terrible draft decisions, Grady Jarrett has been an absolute stud for the Falcons, and I could legitimately see Onyemata lining up next to Grady Jarrett with Ryan Nielsen being a highly impactful player on a relatively consistent basis simply because he's not going to be the focus. And I do think context matters a lot when you're looking at players and production, and I do worry that the presence of a athletic pass rusher, an impact player, next to him is really going to allow him to be his best self. Obviously, I hope not, or at least I hope not against the Saints. Another loss. This is an obvious one. It's Sean Payton. By the way, perks here intentionally spelled wrong. So if you caught that, good for you. And if you didn't, well, Google Sean Payton and pills. It's a running joke here in New Orleans, and yeah. No, enough said. Look, the impact of the loss is kind of already a known quantity. At this point, it's really up to Dennis Allen whether or not we get optimistic or pessimistic. Optimistically, Da has done everything he can this offseason to reform the Saints. Last year, it was the keep the band together squad, which frankly was embarrassing and pathetic. It was bad football all the way around, and the only reason they fell back asswards into what was it, 8 wins, was that just the residual culture and talent from the team Sean built over 15 plus years. That's just the reality. Um, Optimistically, Da has been able to put a staff around himself and to carry out his vision, and they've acquired a significant upgrade at quarterback who's an established player who doesn't need leadership, something Da, at least so far, doesn't provide at all. And with all of those factors in place, maybe he can finally rise to at least being above a mediocre coach, and frankly, that is optimistic at this point. Pessimistically, last year could be the last gasp from Peyton. What he built, the culture he built, the roster he built, and things could very quickly go downhill from here. If the Saints make mistakes, Carr gets hurt, Carr doesn't work out. Again, more on that later. Da just continues to be incompetent as a leader and have bad vision for what the team should be and what wins in today's NFL. And his defense gets older and older, and it's really the only thing he's ever been shown he's good at as a coach. He's a very good defensive coordinator, but if his defense gets older and that's falls off, yeah, there's a lot of risk there. So which one I think is more likely to happen, optimistic or pessimistic, frankly and honestly, I don't know, and that's the scary part. From a content perspective, it's the interesting part, but from a fan perspective, it's kind of frightening when you really have no idea which way things are leaning. So now let's talk about the acquisitions. So when it comes to the acquisitions, I am kind of going to start at the least relevant, least interesting, and we're going to work our way up to what with that criteria you can imagine is the final guy on our list today. So the Saints signed Bryan Edwards, and we're going to go through these very quickly. Bryan Edwards was injured all year last year with the Falcons, but the year before, the 2 years before, played with Derek Carr on the Raiders. The year before actually had a very good year. Optimistically, he's a big body guy who can make contested catches, who's got built-in chemistry with your current starting quarterback, and he's basically Michael Thomas' insurance. And if he does work out and does show that potential, possibly he's a guy where, you have him as your wide receiver 3/wide receiver 4 as a possession guy, going forward, depending on how things work out with Mike and how things work out with him. Pessimistically, 2 of his 3 years make Traquan look like Olave. I felt was a pretty good fucking quote as far as where he's at. He's got 2 years where I think he's under 150 yards for the whole year. He's doing nothing. He's producing nothing. He's got 1 year where he's really, really good. 40 catches, 600 yards, good chunk of touchdowns. I think he had 3 or 4. That's a solid wide receiver. What he did last year, obviously, he was hurt pretty much the whole year, and his first year, those are Traquan Smith numbers. Those are please get off my roster numbers. Now, he's signed for next to nothing. It's not a huge loss if he doesn't work out. But we're just talking about pros and cons here. What could be good, what could be bad. Let's get on to the next guy, which is Nathan Shepard. So, and I know defensive linemen hate this name, but I'm a child and I like childish nicknames. So Nathan Shepard is your classic power pick. And that's what I'm talking about a space eater defensive tackle. This is a guy who doesn't get moved around super easily. He's not a great pass rusher. He's not a high pressure guy, but he's a guy who can be an impactful player, who can definitely help shore up a run game. Was on a really, really good defense last year with the Jets, which does matter. Guys who contributed on good defenses and guys who contributed on ascending teams are the kind of guys that you want to bring in from a character standpoint, from a habit standpoint. So optimistically, he's a guy who should be able to help the Saints significantly improve in what was low key, high key, a ass water run defense last year. Pessimistically, losing Ryan Nielsen, your defensive line coach, not having a lot of talent at defensive end, that puts a ton of pressure on the defensive tackles to do a lot of work. I mean, you basically have Cameron Jordan and nothing along that defensive line right now, except for the free agents we're going to talk about. And even those guys, like, you're not signing top tier guys. You're signing, guys you expect to be role players who maybe end up being really good. And so pessimistically, really, that's kind of where you're at. And if he can't even live up to the space eater component and just hold his ground, well, then you're really up a creek because they have no one who fills that role. The next guy on the list here is Kalen Saunders. Kalen Saunders is coming off a Super Bowl win. He's the most high potential guy, probably of other than obviously the last guy of the players they brought in. He's the most interesting to me. He's a guy who shows flashes. He's an incredible athlete. Was on a Super Bowl winning team. Was a rotational player. Has a reputation for being a great locker room guy and kind of a big brother type player, which is great. That'll fit in right at home with the Saints locker room. Probably will have a ton of fun lining up right next to Cam's goofy ass. But again, he's a really really good athlete. He has an opportunity to seize a starting role. This is there's no one here that's in front of him at the defensive tackle spot. He's got the athleticism. If he can turn flash and turn it into substance and be a 5 to 7 sack guy who's not a disaster in the run game, be healthy, be on the field, like he has that opportunity and he at least has that potential. So he's interesting. Pessimistically, players are available for a reason. Onyemata was, for the most part, just a guy. Sanders could be just another guy. Does that mean it's an awful signing? No, you didn't give the guy $10 million a year. So if he's roughly an Onyemata level player, then you're treading water, and if you can add some impact players around them, then that still can be the part of a really good impactful defense. But looking at just this one player, that is a real possibility. Guy is available on the open market, not getting a huge contract. There may be a reason for that. Sometimes you see potential where other teams didn't, or you're willing to take the gamble and it pays off. Sometimes it doesn't. Next on our list here, so talk about the boomer bust potential. Jamal Williams to me is the biggest boomer bust guy. One of the biggest in this year's offseason, and also definitely to me the biggest boomer bust player the Saints signed. And here's why. Jamal Williams is coming off a fantastic year. He was a workhorse for Detroit. Detroit runs every run concept scheme you can think of. He was amazing in the red zone, ran for over 1,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, the most in Lions history. They've got the second or third greatest running back of all time, was playing for the Lions. Barry Sanders never rushed for more touchdowns than Jamal Williams did. So that's very, very impressive. Optimistically, the Saints were actually pretty damn good for the most part last year of getting into the red zone, and they were a complete ass at converting in it. If he remains a touchdown machine, he's not only going to help other guys be more productive in that area with his presence, but will actually just finish the damn plays. He's also a guy who has shown some ability as a pass catcher historically. It was, within Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, so, it does have some experience doing those types of things. He's very solid in pass protection. Pessimistically, last year was his first year over 600 yards or over 5 touchdowns. If last year was an aberration, you basically have a slight upgrade over Mark Ingram, who likes Pokemon, which, hell, me too. But that's really the gamble here. Did you get a productive impact player, or did you get a guy who had an out of body year with out of band production, largely due to extremely high touch counts? Like, is he just a volume guy? We're about to find out. And then do I expect him to get 17 touchdowns again? No, but we're about to find out if he's a flash in the pan player or if he's a guy who wasn't given as much opportunity as his abilities warranted in Green Bay and just blossomed in Detroit. And it'll be really interesting to see which of those it is. Personally, I am leaning more towards the former than the latter. I am very optimistic about Jamal Williams, and he is going to be definitely one of the most entertaining interviews of the season, without question. Do not let him and Cam Jordan near a microphone together. Good God. Please, please let them near a microphone together. This will be entertaining as shit. And finally, Mr. Mascara himself. I love this photo. I don't care how bad the quality is. Derek Carr obviously played 15 games because the Raiders had held him out because they didn't want him to get hurt because they would have owed him a ton of money. It's really simple. The worst version of Derek Carr, which honestly was pretty much this last season, is a significant upgrade over what the Saints have had at quarterback the last 2 years. Significant. Derek Carr's last year, if you look with it, like you factor in context, Derek Carr's year last year is better than Jameis Winston's best year as a starting quarterback. It's pretty close, but like honestly, he played the position better last year than Winston did in his 30-30 year, where he also threw for 5,000 yards. Um, that's just the reality, which is pretty bad, but also like that's kind of your floor. So, optimistically, the majority of his career, he's been over 65% completions. He is a quarterback who can go to the line, check with me, audible into other plays. He is a guy who can run the full offense, who's used to that, who likes to do that. His best years by far were under Gruden. Where it's a West Coast offense, has a lot in common with Sean's system. Sean's system is in some ways influenced by Gruden and what he brought to the NFL. His first stint before all the emails came out. Um, from the optimist perspective, you have a guy who is still, at least at the tail end of his prime physically, and quarterback's prime is a little bit later than some other positions. Um, so you have a guy who could definitely, be a 3,800 to 4,500, yard passer with 25 to 32, 33 touchdowns a year and, 11 to 16 interceptions. Like just talking rough ranges. That would be really honestly, that would be fantastic. That's enough to win the NFC South most likely. That's enough to be a team that can make a little bit of noise in the playoffs. If you get hot one year, it's maybe a little bit more noise. Like it's a good signing, and he's on a 3-year deal. Pessimistically, it's a lopsided roster. It's aging in weird spots. You have bad coaching. DA brought in all DA's guys. Well, what if DA's guys are DA's guys and they're just like DA has been most of DA's career, which is a asswater coach? And let's say last year wasn't an aberration and the Carr has started regressing. And sometimes quarterbacks have a bad year and they bounce back, and sometimes they hit the wall and they fall off a fucking cliff. And that could happen. Do I think he would still be better than what we had last year? Yes, even the worst version of him is better than that. But not by enough of a margin to guarantee that you're going to win the division. And if the Saints make all these moves and they go keep DA and they do all the stuff they've done and then they don't win the division, with the Panthers having the number one pick and the Falcons stacking up some talent, making some sneaky decent roster moves, and Tampa's Tampa, so we're not super worried about them. Unless they get Caleb Williams, I'm not worried about Tampa. Like, yeah, not good. Highly, extremely not good. Wearing bags on our heads again, not good. Do I think that's the most likely outcome? No. I think the best case scenario is pretty far out there, but I think at minimum probably win the division two at least 2 out of the next 3 years. Um, he'll have more really fun good games than not, but he's not Drew, so like you'll have some stinkers and clunkers, and even Drew had those. They were just way less common. And we'll just have to adjust to that. But I do expect it to be a pretty significant upgrade over what we were dealing with, recently. And just to leave us off here, I know I'm going a little bit long, but As we come into the draft, and I will be over the next week or so putting out what my draft list is, just my draft priorities. I think the number one need right now, without question, is the defensive line. Uh, Even with the free agents they brought in, again, neither of these guys are guys that you expect to be cornerstone players. Cam's still a good, productive player, but he's not what he once was. So you have exactly zero impact players along your defensive line. So DT, D end, I don't care, double dip. It's a giant need. Um, Young running back, you need a back with some burst. Williams, he can make some big plays, but he's not a guy you can just hit the throttle and go. Neither is AK. If you're gonna be a run heavy team, you really do need that element. They gotta bring it in. The line backer depth is sneaky shit. And you have one older guy and one guy who's showing some signs of maybe potentially being a little bit injury prone. You need some linebacker depth there. Guard and O-line. The whole O-line is banged up. Everybody on the O-line has a freaking Liz Frank injury except our center. Not everybody, but it's pretty close. Ramchek has degenerative knees. Penning is an unknown coming off a bad injury. Ruiz is an unknown coming off a bad injury, and Pete's fucking Pete. You need O-lineman, nickel corner, safety, and some way, shape, or form, probably a UDFA, but bring in a damn kicker. Let's need some competition. He has been bad the last 2 years. 2 years ago by his standards, and last year just period. And this is a giant prove it year for him. So for me, that's really what I'm looking at from the draft between actual picks and UDFA's, and we'll see where they go. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to do all those wonderful YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. If you do leave comments, I usually respond to them within a couple of days. So hope you enjoyed this, and more content coming soon.